Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good, they are educable. Good. Okay, so today we're discussing the third of our series of the big three rituals, which characterize Judaism or characterize ritually observant Jewish life, and all of which have been rejected, supplanted, replaced, transformed, modified, reinterpreted, whatever verb you like, right, by earliest Christianity and then from Christianity of ancient times to this day. There was circumcision, food laws, and today we're looking at Sabbath, or the seventh day. After this, we'll be looking at Passover, Easter, a central ritual for both Judaism and Christianity, and then we'll move on to theology, to theological points, truth claims. That's where we're going in the course. Okay, so today we're talking about the Sabbath, or the seventh day, what we call in English Saturday. What does Saturday mean? Yes?
Saturn's Day?
Yes, Saturday is the day of Saturn. So you know right away that the names of the days of the week that we use in English, in fact, reflect old astrological ideas, where each day, each of the 7 days, is under the influence of one of the 7 planetary spheres. The ancients knew about 5 planets, right? Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. 5 planets plus the sun and the moon. So you have sun, day, moon, day. All right, then you got Tuesday with this funny Norse stuff. Wednesday is more funny Norse stuff. Okay, but our English names are a mixture of things, but the names still show, and that's what we call in the biz an astrological week. The idea that there are 7 days, each day is under the influence of a certain planetary sphere. There's endless discussion whether the Hebrew Bible, with its notion of Sabbath rest every 7th day, has anything to do with this astrological week of 7 days as calculated by astrologers. The answer is probably not, but the question is very complicated and messy, and for our purposes, I'm not going to worry about it because it doesn't really affect us. The key point is, if you like your weekend, you should be grateful to the Torah, because the astrological week never produced the pattern of life which emerges from the Torah, with its every 7th day is a holiday, every 7th day is a holy day, every 7th day is a day of rest. That never came out of the astrological week. That comes only out of the Torah. And then Christians, of course, modify it and give us Sunday. And then gradually, in the 19th century, we get a 5-day. Okay, now we digress. Okay, so it comes out of the Torah. So, let's talk about the Torah. The Hebrew word, of course, is Sabbath, which I didn't write down, but you understand the word Sabbath. What does the word Sabbath mean?
They're whispering it.
Whispering it. What's Sabbath? Somebody don't whisper. Somebody say something. Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, Vayishbot, which apparently means to cease or to cease labor. So Sabbath might be literally translated rest or cessation from labor, something like that. Did somebody whisper that? So why don't you say it out loud? You get a gold star if you said it out loud. But if you whisper it, I can't give you a gold star. Okay, so circumcision is basically one chapter in the Bible, Genesis 17. That's the big chapter, plus some scattered references. And large tracts in the Bible go on and never mention circumcision. The food laws. Food laws is one big chapter, Leviticus 11. And then we got a couple of other little things here and there, Deuteronomy 14, and some other references here and there. The Sabbath, in contrast, you have everywhere. There are references scattered throughout the entire Hebrew Bible, virtually, from one end to the other, about the Sabbath. Don't know exactly why this is so, but it is so. Now, the number of passages involved is much greater, much larger, and apparently the ancient Israelites themselves attributed much significance to the Sabbath in a way that food laws and circumcision perhaps only emerged later on as ritually significant markers. Okay, what do we see in these passages? I gave you a bunch of them on your syllabus. It's built into the nature of the cosmos. Right? God creates the world in 6 days, Genesis chapter 1. What that actually means is not our worry at the moment. God creates the world in 6 days. Then on the 7th day, God rested. In other words, according to that narrator, according to that philosopher, right, the Sabbath is part and parcel of the cosmic order. It doesn't say in Genesis chapter 2, the first few verses, it doesn't say God commanded you to rest on the Sabbath also, but surely that's implied. Surely that's meant. God rested on the Sabbath day and made it holy, understanding, well, that's why we Israelites do the same thing. We also rest on the seventh day and make it holy. But this is also a pre-Sinaitic commandment. Or actually, I agree, it's not actually a commandment, it's implied. Okay, so this is one of the main contrasts in the two versions of the Decalogue. What does Decalogue mean? 10 Commandments. Okay, what are the 10 Commandments? I'm asking you to list the 10 Commandments and ask you to tell me what on earth is the 10 Commandments? I know, it's a movie, 1956, Cecil B. DeMille. Cast of Thousands, Charlton Heston. Yes, I know that. What else is it?
They're found in multiple places in the Bible.
Twice. In the Torah, it's referred to twice. The 10 Commandments are what? So these are the commandments, 10 in number, thank you, right? Given by whom to whom? God to Moses, to the people of Israel. Right? And Moses wrote them down on 2 tablets. You all seen photos, so you know exactly what they look like. No, we don't know what they look like, but it's on 2 tablets. Right? The old joke: take 2 tablets and call me in the morning. Right? So this is these are the 10 Commandments, the Big Ten. Those of you who are followers of sports, right? So this is the Big Ten. Right? Now, of those Big Ten, the Sabbath is number, well, it depends how you count. We'll do the Jewish counting. Number 4. Sorry, that's one of the ways of Jewish counting. There are also Christian countings. It gets messy. But it's number 4. Moses forgot to write numbers when he gave the 10 Commandments. So the result is Jews and Christians have been arguing ever since how to count the 10. Look at the notes in the JSB, and it'll explain some of this to you. Anyway, number 4 is observe or remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Okay, and as everybody notes, and you can look in the JSB to explain, right, the 2 versions of the 10 Commandments that we have. One in Exodus chapter 20, the other one in Deuteronomy, where Moses retrospectively retells many of the stories, incidents, and laws that had appeared earlier in the Torah. Moses, unfortunately, does not use exactly the same language. And the divergence is greatest in the Sabbath. In the book of Exodus, we are to remember the Sabbath day because we were once slaves in Egypt, and God. No, sorry, other way around. Right, we were once. God created the world in 6 days, and therefore we are to rest. We're echoing back Genesis 1, whereas in Deuteronomy, all of a sudden, something to do with slavery. Why these 2 differ is an interesting question. On the handout, I write that little brief note. It's perhaps the problem is universality versus Israelite specific, whatever. You can look at the passage. Anyway, it's right there in the 10 Commandments. It's a big one. Is circumcision mentioned in the 10 Commandments, class?
No.
Are the food laws mentioned in the 10 Commandments?
No.
No. Okay. Sabbath, like Israel, like God, is holy. I mentioned that already, right? The concept of holiness applies to time as well as places, as well as objects, as well as persons. So the Sabbath is holy. Another way by which the Israelites are showing you how special the Sabbath is. Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between Israel and God. The Sabbath is a covenant. This is the same kind of language we saw in connection with circumcision, referred to the Sabbath here too. So, put it all together. The legacy, the biblical legacy about the Sabbath is richer than about food laws or circumcision. And it seems to indicate that the Israelites themselves attributed much significance to it. Not just one chapter somewhere, but there's a very rich biblical legacy on the subject, from which we deduce the Israelites themselves attributed much significance to it, and saw the Sabbath as not just a day off, saw the Sabbath as a special day in the relationship between God and Israel. Okay, questions, observations? Now, as we'll see today, as you saw in your reading, as we'll see on Monday, when we talk about the Sabbath, we have 2 different things we're talking about. 1, it's a day off, a rest from work. So one thing we need to talk about is, what does it mean when we say you don't do work on a Sabbath day? That we might call the negative side, the prohibition. Don't. Then we have a positive side. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, how do you do that? What do? The day that is a spiritual day. The day has some kind of connection between God and us in some way. We'll see in the Christian material these two different sides of the Sabbath, which become Sunday, and we'll see now also two different sides of that on the Jewish side. So I'm going to start with the prohibition side, the don't side. Don't is the Sabbath, right? The prohibitions. Do not do any manner of work on the Sabbath day. Lo taseh kol malacha is what it says in Exodus 20, echoed in Deuteronomy. What does this mean? Now, just imagine that you are an Israelite in the wilderness. Moses has come down, aka Charlton Heston has come down from Mount Sinai with 2 tablets, and he proclaims them out loud, and Moses says in his thunderous voice, "Don't do work on the Sabbath day." Did you see the movie that Ten Commandments? It's kind of cheeky, it's kind of funny in retrospect. Special effects in the 1950s just aren't quite what they have become in the movies. Nonetheless, it's a blast. It's a hoot. You should watch it. So anyway, the thundering voice, "Don't do any work on the Sabbath day." So I can just imagine some Israelites, some smart-ass in the back saying, Moses, I don't understand what that means. Don't do any amount of work on the seventh day. It means I shouldn't go to work. I shouldn't get paid. But I could go to the mall and go shopping, right? That's not a problem, right? And that's not work, is it? And I like to work out. I got my home gym. I could sit there all day and work up a sweat, but that's not really work, is it? Then someone else would say, yeah, I can take my kids to the beach, right? That's not a problem. That's not work, is it? You understand the questions will multiply very rapidly. What does it mean, thou shalt not do any manner of work? One does not need to be a Pharisee or a Jesuit or a closed-minded reader of the text to understand immediately, this is vague. My idea of work and your idea of work might not be the same. So it's interesting to pursue this point, to understand this as a specimen not just of biblical exegesis, or interpretation, remember, exegesis, fancy word, interpretation, right? But also as an example of how the Sabbath itself grows. As we look through the text over time, we can see more and more things gets prohibited. There's greater and greater specificity as we move forward in time, as Israelite culture and society is less and less comfortable with this rather vague general prohibition, and we're looking for specifics. So we look in the Bible itself. What does the Bible itself tell us before we look at post-biblical material? So in the Bible itself we have various passages. Exodus 35, not to kindle a fire. Lo tevaru esh b'chol mashrotechem b'yom haShabbat. You may not kindle a fire. Though later Jews argue whether that means you shall not kindle a fire or you may not let the fire remain lit.
You may not use a Kindle.
That's what it is, right. Don't use a Kindle on the Sabbath. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's very good. Right. iPads are okay. Well, okay, that's not true. iPads are not okay. But yeah, okay. Well, let's not. Anyway, where was I? Yes. So later Jews will argue whether it means you may not kindle a fire, i.e. strike a match and light a fire, but if you have a fire already lit from before, it's perfectly okay to leave to take advantage of a already lit flame. Okay, that's a good example of close reading will provide different modes of reading. Okay, but our friends, the rabbis, the sages, they thought it meant do not light a fire. That's how they understood the prohibition of Exodus 35. Then we have the story of the wood chopper, which is alluded to by Goldenberg in your reading. Right? We're not quite sure what the prohibition is, but whoever it was who did it did something bad. He went out and was mikoshesh eitzim b'yom haShabbat. What does that mean? He was chopping wood, gathering wood. We're not sure what it means. Whatever it was, he lost his head over it, because he was executed for violating the Sabbath. So if I knew exactly what that meant, I would know something else about what's prohibited on the Sabbath according to the Bible. Then we have Exodus 16, the manna. Remember the chapter of the manna I asked you to read a few weeks ago? Yeah, just humor me. It must be nice, right? I'm a cold and I'm feeling 100%. Just say yes. Right, you all remember the passage in the manna, Exodus 16, that we read a few weeks ago? Yes. As an example of Jewish and Christian Bible exegesis. Well, I mentioned then, preparing you for this moment, that interwoven into that chapter about the manna from heaven is stuff about the Sabbath. Right? And surely the narrator has stuff in the Sabbath there because he, the narrator, thinks this is the source for Sabbath laws that later later Israelites will want to observe. Something about you don't go outside the camp on the Sabbath, you prepare your food ahead of time on the Sabbath. That's why does the manna fall on the Sabbath, class? No. So how do you eat on the Sabbath if you're relying on the manna and the manna doesn't fall on the Sabbath? What do? You have double on Friday. Right, so God is telling us that we need to prepare our food for the Sabbath on Friday, because on Sabbath we may not cook anything. We need to prepare our Sabbath food on Friday. This is what later Jews understood, right, from this chapter. And one could argue, I think reasonably, that the narrator meant this to be understood in this way. This is meant to explain to you the origin of various Sabbath laws and prohibitions. Exodus 16. The fullest, most detailed chapter is from Jeremiah 17. Remember, who's Jeremiah again? Remind me, somebody? Jeremiah? One of the prophets, right? One of the prophets, right? He's not, so the two golden ages of prophecy, 8th century BC, Isaiah, Jerusalem is the big one, Hosea, Amos, 8th century BC, and then 6th century. If you want 700 over here, 600 over here. That's Jeremiah, is in the latter group. Jeremiah, Ezekiel are the two big prophets from around the year of 600, give or take. Okay, Jeremiah 17. Here we have a very interesting paragraph. Should I read it? Nah, I'm not going to read it. You can read it yourselves. Anyway, interesting paragraph which Jeremiah is waxing eloquent about what is prohibited on the Sabbath. And we have here some very pregnant sentences. Sentences that will launch whole tractates in the Talmud later on as they try to decipher what exactly Jeremiah meant. But here I see the growth of Sabbath prohibitions. There's something here about, hear the word of the Lord, thus says, where are you? Verse 21, do not bear a burden on the Sabbath day, or bring it by the gates of Jerusalem. Do not bear a burden out of your houses or do any work. Keep the Sabbath day holy. So here's something about carrying a burden. Not to carry a burden out of your house, not to carry a burden through the gates of Jerusalem. From these verses, later Jews will deduce the prohibition that we may not take a burden, which is understood to mean anything, right, out of the house into the public sphere, into the public way. We're not to go out through the gates of Jerusalem outside the settlement. Right? Later Jews will develop a whole series of very complex rules governing what we may carry on the Sabbath. We may wear clothes, for example, on the Sabbath. Pious Jews don't walk around naked on the Sabbath. You're allowed to wear clothes that's not considered to be transporting, but you may not have something in your pocket. Because that's transporting, that's carrying. You may not walk around carrying something in your hand, but if it's an item of clothing, of course you may wear it. I'm just starting with the rules, trust me on this. The rules get very complicated. And then the rabbis come up with this ingenious device to circumvent the prohibition, called an eruv. Goldenberg mentions that. Forget that. Too much information. TMI. Okay, so this comes out of Jeremiah and a parallel passage in Nehemiah, where we see in these texts, which come after the Torah, the prohibitions are expanding. Moses in the Torah never said, don't transport on the Sabbath, don't carry a burden on the Sabbath, don't carry a burden out of your house on the Sabbath, don't carry a burden through the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Moses never said those things. That's not in the Torah. Here these prohibitions are growing, multiplying. And they will continue to do so over the course of time as Jews try harder and harder to understand what does it mean when it says, do not do any manner of work on the seventh day. Questions on that? Isaiah 58:13, a very important verse for the development of the Sabbath. This is from Isaiah. Modern scholars will tell you this is not by the real Isaiah of Jerusalem in the 8th century BCE. It's by a later anonymous prophet who we simply agree to call Isaiah because we have no other name for him, who's alive in the 6th century BCE. For my purposes here, it doesn't matter in the slightest. Isaiah 58:13. If on account of the Sabbath you turn back your foot from doing your own desires on my holy day. What does that mean? I'm not sure. Ancient readers weren't sure either what this means, if you turn back your foot. They thought it meant, if you don't go on a journey, you stay home. They might be right. I have nothing better to suggest. It's an odd phrase. Im tashib mi Shabbat raglacha socha v'zecha b'yom kadshi. Not clear at all what Isaiah means. If on account of the Sabbath you turn back your foot from doing your own desires by holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor by not going your own ways, finding your own interests, or speaking words, then, he says, there are some boons and rewards waiting for you. Later Jews will argue exactly what these phrases mean. Not at all clear what these things mean. What does it mean, we're speaking words? Apparently there's a prohibition of certain kind of speech on the Sabbath. Later rabbinic Jews thought it meant you shouldn't talk business on the Sabbath. Other things, of course, you can talk about on the Sabbath. There's no requirement to be quiet, to be silent, but there's a notion of appropriate speech. Right? If that's what the prophet meant, I don't know, but that's what the prophet was understood to mean. The most interesting line here, though, is if you call the Sabbath a delight. This is discussed by Goldenberg. The idea we have a tension in the Sabbath laws between the Sabbath as a day of prohibition, don't. Be careful lest you do something to violate the Sabbath, which seems to be entirely negative, which seems to be, to be very blunt, oppressive, restrictive. But there's another side to the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day of delight. So I'm going to jump to the last paragraph here on the notes, and I'll loop back. What does it mean that the Sabbath is a delight? Again, what Isaiah meant, I don't know. But I know what happens to this idea in Judaism, from antiquity down to modern times. The Sabbath, on one hand, is a day of restrictions and prohibitions. On the other hand, it is a day of delight. How is the Sabbath day a day of delight? It's a day of delight in two senses in classical Judaism, from ancient through modern, contemporary times. It's a day of delight in a spiritual sense. Right? You remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. How do we do that? We spend time in synagogue on the Sabbath. We study the scriptures on the Sabbath. We meditate on the scriptures on the Sabbath. And this idea is already ancient. This is mentioned by Philo and Josephus in the 1st century of our era. And this, for the rabbis at least, is one side of the delight aspect of the Sabbath. Because what is a greater delight than to take a day off from work and sit and study Torah? That's the spiritual side of the delight. There is also, to be very blunt, a carnal side. What does that mean? If I have a nice outfit I'm going to wear, I'm going to save it for the Sabbath. Pardon the expression, like Sunday best. We used to have such an idea in English. A Sunday best. Well, the Sunday best idea comes from a Saturday best idea. If you have a nice pair of clothes, you wear it on the Sabbath. You have a nice meal lined up, you save it for the Sabbath. You want good food on the Sabbath. You want to eat well and eat a lot on the Sabbath. Right? You're feeding the body. It's a day of delight for the body. And last but not least, it's the right day of the week for a husband and wife to have sex. Of course, they can have sex whenever they feel like it, right? Given things about menstrual purity and such things. But in principle, husband and wife. But, however, people are busy, people are tired. When's the right day of the week? Answer, it's the Sabbath. Now, of course, there always are these fuddy-duddies around, right, who see people having fun and they immediately object, or they immediately find reason to find fault. So we have such people too. And there are those already known from antiquity already, for whom the day of the Sabbath is a day of prohibition, right, overwhelms the idea, the concept of the Sabbath as a delight, or they don't have this idea of the Sabbath as a delight. For them, it's just a day of prohibitions. So we know about some Jews in antiquity who are fasting on the Sabbath. Are fasting on the Sabbath. They say the Sabbath is a day you don't eat at all. It's a weekly fast day. And similarly, in the Middle Ages, there will be Jews who will say, right, you may not have sex on the Sabbath. It's inappropriate to have sex on the Sabbath. Learner's footnote. What would be the legal basis of prohibiting sex on the Sabbath? Answer, the prohibition of plowing. Okay, but back to where I was. So you have then a prohibition. There are those out there who see the restrictive side of the Sabbath as overwhelming the other aspect. But Rabbinic Judaism, classical Rabbinic Judaism, from ancient through modern times, sees a balance. It is both restrictive, prohibited, long list of prohibitions. At the same time, there is, from Isaiah 58, the idea that the Sabbath is a day of delight, spiritual delight, carnal delight, and that is fine. That is part and parcel of what makes the Sabbath the Sabbath. Okay, you had a question.
Yes. So, for the Jews who believe that you should, have your best meal on the Sabbath, how would they have the best meal? I'm assuming would it be cold then, since you can't light a fire?
Yes, exactly. So Friday night, anybody can have a hot meal on the Sabbath, because you remember what I said earlier. You can light the fire in advance, get your oven hot, and even after you don't feed it anymore, it will remain hot for some time. So anybody can have a hot meal on a Friday night. That does not require any great leaps of imagination. Shabbat during the day, however, it gets harder, right? How do you get a warm meal if you can't light a fire? Well, not to worry. Ancient and medieval Jews figured out ways that you develop a kind of thick stew kind of thing, which is hot on Friday evening, and you pack it up in just such a way so that when you're ready to eat it on Saturday midday, it is still hot, or at least warm. Still warm. But you're right, that is a problem. If you are a critic of the Sabbath, you will make fun of the fact that the Jews are eating cold food on the Sabbath. That's mentioned by Martial, a Roman poet in the 1st century, and our friend Justin already makes fun of the fact the Jews are eating lukewarm food on the Sabbath. That's another way of saying it. But you're right, that is a challenge. But the idea is you want to have your gourmet food and somehow it's still warm and somehow you haven't lit the fire at the same time. Yeah, it's a challenge. Modern Jews get around this by having timers on their ovens. On the theory, if you set your timer before the Sabbath starts, then it's not your fault the oven goes on at 10:30. And your food is nice and warm by 12. But the rules are very complicated, but that's in a nutshell. Consult your local rabbi if you want to know all the rules. Okay, other questions? Okay, the most amazing... Oh, I'm going fast today. Okay, the most amazing development in the history of the Sabbath prohibition side, the negative side, the prohibited side, is the list of 39 labors, which is the next sheet. Is that up there? Okay. List of 39 labors that appears in the Mishnah. Okay, does somebody remind me, what is the Mishnah? Okay, what is the Mishnah? Don't confuse it with Midrash, remember? Right, what is the Mishnah, Anna?
Oral Torah.
Mishnah is oral Torah. I wish you had not said that, because that was going to require me to give an hour-long lecture to explain why it's not the oral Torah. Okay, I'll accept it for an opening bid. But let's get more specific. What is the Mishnah? Answer. The Mishnah is... Finish the sentence. Yeah, Harry?
A text codified in like 200 CE, which was written down. I kind of was going to say something like what Anna said, in that it was writing down parts of the oral Torah. But it was...
All right, how much time do I have here? Let's see. No, I got plenty of time. I'm going fast today because my throat hurts. Okay, then, all right, let's get to the key points. The Mishnah is a book. Okay? The oral Torah is an idea, a concept, a theory. So let's start with the first point. The Mishnah is a book. At some point the book is written down. We're not sure whether it was meant originally as an oral book, kind of like Homer, where the poems are memorized and sung for a long time by memory, and only gradually does it get written down. So sort of like that. Or when the Mishnah began its life as a written book. Okay, we're not sure. But it's a book. It's a relatively fixed collection of texts. It's a big book. Okay. The subject of this big book, this Mishnah book, which, as Harry correctly said, emerges in the 2nd century of our era. At the same time, Justin Martyr is busy talking away over here, 160 or so CE. The sages of the land of Israel are busy writing and producing what will become the Mishnah book. Okay, it's a book full of laws, full of legal discussions, legal points. 63 tractates in the Mishnah, as they're called. 62 out of the 63 are discussions of legal material. Legal material, rituals, customs, practices, things you should do, things you should not do, things you must not do, and if you do, then what the punishment might be. Right? A whole series of such things. How the priests in the temple go about their rituals. There is no temple anymore, you object, in the 2nd century about CE. Yeah, exactly. Mishnah is a very odd book. It talks about a lot of time about things which are no longer practicable. Imagine there's still a temple and there are priests who are still sitting there, and the purity laws and all those things. Mishnah is obsessed with those things. Okay, it's an odd book. So it's a book of legal materials. Right? Rulings, discussions, debates about points of ritual practice, custom, normative law, written in Hebrew by our friends, the rabbis or the sages, in the land of Israel. Now, okay, shy of 2 points, 2 minutes. Right, so, where does the Mishnah come from? How does the Mishnah know this stuff? How does the Mishnah know 1,000 pages worth of material? That's how long it is in English translation, 1,000 pages. How does the Mishnah fill up 1,000 pages full of material about ritual, custom, law, practice? How does it know all this stuff? And one of the most amazing things about the Mishnah is it doesn't tell us. It just gives laws, rituals, debates. They just spout, just talk one after another. It comes at you in profusion. You're buried in this massive material that doesn't tell you where it comes from. Later sages who read the Mishnah, studied the Mishnah, were very bothered by this. And their answer is, I know where the Mishnah comes from. The Mishnah is the oral Torah. Charlton Heston came down from Mount Sinai, and he had on his manly shoulders the 2 tablets of the law, the 10 Commandments. That's just one shoulder. On his other manly shoulder, Charlton Heston brought down the oral Torah, in which Moses would explain what the Torah means. Moses would expand upon the written Torah, which is just the smaller part of the Torah. The bigger part of the Torah is the oral part, the part that God never wrote down, the part that Moses taught to his disciples, and their disciples to their disciples, and their disciples to their disciples, down to us. And the Mishnah is the repository of that. That's a theory about the Mishnah. The Mishnah itself never propounds about itself, except in a few very discrete passages. You have to wait to the next layer in tradition, with which the later rabbis and sages who study the Mishnah don't like the fact that the Mishnah is a cannon rolling free on the deck of Judaism. We can regularize it. We can get it under control if we say, oh, it's the oral Torah. They're not making it up. It comes from tradition. Good example. Mishnah Shabbat, chapter 7, Mishnah 2. I'll pick one passage out of, just by complete random. I have 1,000 pages worth. Here's one. The primary labors period on the Sabbath are 40 save 1. Goldenberg gives you a translation of this passage, also a brief discussion of it. The primary labors permitted on the Sabbath are 40 save 1. Okay, you have 1 through 11, sewing through baking, 12 through 24, shearing wool, tearing and stowing stitches, hunting deer, building, pulling down, extinguishing, kindling, striking with a hammer, 39, taking out from one domain to another. Okay, Goldenberg gives you a nice discussion of this, arguing that these labors are fundamentally the rabbinic view of civilization. Right, the way these are clustered, what the rabbis are saying, what's prohibited on the Sabbath is human culture. Right, all these things that we humans do to create food, paragraph 1. To make clothing, paragraph 2. Paragraph 3, to prepare parchment and write. Paragraph 4, building and fire. Then we have 39, taking one domain to another. That's always a tricky one. But okay, leave that aside for a second. Here, these paragraphs are the rabbinic concept of what human civilization is about. That's what's prohibited on the Sabbath. Okay, that's very nice. And my friend Bob Goldenberg teaches at SUNY Stony Brook. Nice fellow. Right? I think it's a very lovely essay that he wrote. But the question that bothers me, which doesn't bother Bob, because he's interested in what he wants to do in that essay, right? The interesting question is to observe, how does the Mishnah know this? Let's discuss, what does the Mishnah know? The Mishnah knows that there are primary labors. You see then in my translation, which is what this is, I have a note below. Primary labors. These labors are primary in the sense that there are secondary and tertiary labors that unfold under each of them. So the Mishnah has this idea that there are archetypal prohibitions of labor, which in turn encapsulate or include other labors that unfold beneath them. So, classic example. Number 3, reaping or harvesting. So the classic example is you're out there in the wheat field harvesting the wheat. That's what we're talking about. However, by extension, reaping also includes plucking fruit, which in Hebrew has a different verb, different set of verbs. Plucking fruit. Remember that for Monday, when we talk about Jesus and his disciples. Plucking fruit, or plucking grain. By extension then too, the next one, standing under a tree and shaking the branches so the fruit will fall off. Which is a further extension. Each of these 39 labors then is a master group, a master class of labor, within which certain labors are included, which unfold to include various sub-labors. Do you have that idea anywhere in the Torah class? Did Moses come down from Mount Sinai and tell us there are master groups of labors and subgroups and then subgroups? Did Moses talk that way?
No.
No. And if you say, yeah, but who cares? It's just a matter of classifying the stuff. It's all the same. It's all prohibited, right? That's not all the same. That's Mishnah, chapter 7, Mishnah 1 of Mishnah Shabbat, which I didn't give you. Neither did Goldenberg. It matters because if you do an act, a series of acts on the Sabbath by mistake, by accident, and only realize oh my God, it's Saturday today, I forgot. Or, oh my God, in Hebrew school they never told me you're not allowed to do this on the Sabbath. At that point, we jurists want to sit down and say, what exactly did you do? What are the labors that you performed? And are they in fact a single category of labor, or are they multiple categories of labor? Because if they are a single category of labor, then you're obligated to bring an atonement sacrifice only for that whole category that you've violated. They're not considered to be discrete acts. They're discrete acts only if they belong to different classes. What are the classes? 39 classes. Now that's an extraordinary idea. Where do the rabbis get that? Is that anywhere in the Torah? The answer is no. And then where do they get this crazy idea there are 39 prohibited classes of labor? 39, that's such an odd number. Where does that number come from? Is that in the Torah? The answer is no. And then you ask, let's look at these 39. Where do these come from? Well, some of them do come from the Torah, like kindling. Right, number 37. Right, does this come from the Torah, as I mentioned before. But most of these don't come from the Torah. So where does all this stuff come from? is an excellent example where the rabbis in Rabbinic Judaism in the Mishnah have, in fact, let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, have overwhelmed the Torah. The Torah's original writing about what's prohibited on the Sabbath cannot compare with the degree of specificity, the degree of detail, and this overwhelming concern with classification that we see here in the Mishnah. This is an excellent example where how we get from the Torah to the Mishnah is a giant question mark. If you are a pious Jew living today, your answer will be, it comes from tradition. And if you are pious, you then would say the tradition somehow goes back to the oral Torah and Moses at Mount Sinai. If you are a historian, you would say, well, these things grow over time in ways that we can't trace any longer, right? And the rabbis, fundamentally, at some point, you have to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, and say they made it up. That's such an ugly phrase. They created it, right? It's cultural creativity. They are enacting in the Mishnah prohibitions, laws, rituals, etc., which have no basis in the Torah at all, but which come from somewhere else, and ultimately become enshrined in the Mishnah and then part and parcel of Judaism. Now this list is fascinating. So now I want to know, where do these things come from and what do they do with them? That's what I do all day when I'm not teaching CB 23. It's the number of this course, CB 23. These are the things that I worry about. This is how I make a living. Working on the Mishnah and trying to understand where it comes from. Do you have any questions? We have like about 1 minute left. Do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
So, if you were going to describe the Mishnah in 2 sentences,
Not more. Yes.
like,
What would I say?
yes,
How would I say? The Mishnah is a rabbinic book from the 2nd century, concerned with laws, rituals, customs, and practices. Period. That's one sentence. I might then say its most remarkable characteristic are all its legal debates and disputes. I might add that. I don't have to add that. I would say 2nd century rabbis, laws, rituals. That's the big stuff. And we have to have the word book in there somewhere. So it's not to be confused with an idea or a concept like the oral Torah. It's a concrete thing. Okay, how's that? Did I get full credit? Okay, everybody. Enjoy your